Welcome back to the Sports Hour here on Flow FM. It's time to head now to our world sports expert, Eddie Dadds, contributor at scplaybook.com.au. Great to have you on the line again. Eddie, how are you?
Fantastic, Ellis. Back in beautiful Australia, back in Adelaide. The city's buzzing. There's the Fringe on. The AFL starting this week. Got Live Golf coming up. One of the great places in the world, Ellis. It's great to be back on home turf.
Living your best life, that is for sure. Eddie, let's go to the NFL, which I know you're very passionate about. We're talking about free agency and the 100 best available players who could potentially score themselves some decent deals. Now, give us the lowdown on why it is so prestigious to be a free agent in the NFL with a big reputation, not just some sort of young kid trying to make their way, but give us the sort of the lowdown on how free agency works in the NFL and give us your views on who the best players are that could potentially be in line for some big contracts coming into the 2023 season.
Yeah, Ellis, this is probably the biggest time of the year for NFL franchises. Now, what sets the NFL apart from a couple of the other leagues in America is that it has a really rigid salary cap. So the NBA's got what they call a soft cap, where you can spend up to a certain amount, and then over that, it just costs you a little bit more money. So essentially, there's not really a salary cap in the NBA. Then Major League Baseball doesn't have any salary cap at all, so that's why you see the Yankees spending hundreds of millions of dollars. The NFL does have a salary cap, so that means teams have to get really creative with the players they sign, who they sign, where they sign, which is why that this time of year, which is the free agency period, is probably the biggest time of the year for NFL franchises, trying to make that next step from, also rans up until Super Bowl contenders. So there's a few big storylines floating around at the moment. Probably the biggest one is Aaron Rodgers, who's obviously currently the Green Bay Packers quarterback. He's a Super Bowl champion, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Now, he's not actually a free agent, but there is a trade that's in the works between the Packers and the Jets, the New York Jets, that would send Aaron Rodgers over there. And that's kind of, from what I understand, sort of putting a dampener on the rest of free agency, because sort of the whole league, it's one of those moves that the whole league is kind of waiting to see what happens, because that'll determine whether they make any big splashes themselves in free agency. But we are, even without that, we are seeing a few big moves coming around. One that really caught my eye today was Jimmy Garoppolo, the San Francisco 49ers quarterback. He's signing with the Las Vegas Raiders, which is going to be huge for the Raiders. They desperately need a decent quarterback to keep themselves relevant. A couple other big ones. Mike White is leaving the Jets, which is probably going to make way for Aaron Rodgers. It's also happening, Alice. It's one of the craziest times of the year. We've still got guys like Odell Beckham Jr., who's been out of the league for a little while. He's a chance to come back in. Sam Darnold's now moved to the San Francisco 49ers. It's just absolute carnage. I mean, it's one of those things where I do sort of wish the Australian sports were a little bit more like this. It's a massive deal if any player moves during the free agency period or the trade period in the AFL. And I sort of wish it was a bit more open slather, that we saw, the best players moving around as often as they do in America.
Now, tell us, for those listeners in particular who might not be aware as to why it is such a advantageous position to be in, to be a free agent, aside from just being able to be in control of your own destiny without having to engineer a trade between clubs, Eddie, are players up for potentially huge bonanza signing bonuses and things like that? We see it with the round ball game. Often when you're a free agent, you can negotiate a big signing on fee. Are the NFL free agents in a position to dictate huge financial incentives for themselves?
Absolutely, Ellis. And because there is some of the good players on the market, there tends to be a bit of a markup on people's value when they enter free agency. So, for example, Jimmy Garoppolo, who I mentioned earlier, who's signed with the Las Vegas Raiders, he's signing a 3-year, $67.5 million deal with the Las Vegas Raiders, which is very much over what you would think his market value is as a quarterback. He's sort of like a middle of the range, 10th or 15th best quarterback in the league. And the fact that he's probably going to be earning $23, $24 million a year is an indication that, you can really dictate your terms. The other really good thing about free agency for the players is that they're able to sort of get out of cities or situations they don't really like. So, we see it in the NBA all the time. Everyone wants to go to the Los Angeles Lakers because you get to live in LA and you get to play for the Lakers, and who would want to play for the Charlotte Hornets over in Charlotte, that sort of thing. So, like you say, it's a big opportunity for players. It's started to come into the AFL a little bit more. This idea of free agency. In the past, it was you sign with a team and you're under contract for God knows how long with that team. So I am enjoying seeing the Americanization of some of the Australian sports when it comes to contracts and trades and that sort of thing.
Well said, Eddie. We'll move to tennis, and we're talking about the Indian Wells, where we've had a bit of an exchange at the end of a game between Stan Wawrinka and the little-known Holger Rune, the Dane, who stayed in this game against the odds, Eddie, and the ageing Stan Wawrinka good enough to eventually win the game and stave off the scare. But we did get a fiery little exchange on the court at the end of the game. It's not the worst we've seen in tennis, that's for sure, but a bit of a poke going the way of Stan Wawrinka. What did you make of this little exchange, Eddie?
It's a funny one, Alice. Stan Wawrinka is not sort of the kind of guy that strikes me as one who likes to poke people's buttons, but this is definitely not the first time we've seen him be involved in a sort of fracas at the end of a game. Him and Nick Kyrgios famously had a little exchange, which I won't go into the details of here, but it turns out Holger Rune, who's he's only 19 years old, one of the most up-and-coming players in the world. He's going to be right up there in Grand Slams in the future, but the 37-year-old Stan Wawrinka managed to hold him off 7-5 in the third. But it was really at the end of the game where things got a little bit interesting. Wawrinka called Rune a baby last year, which is probably the catalyst for this event. But Wawrinka said, "Good game, you okay?" Rune said, "You got nothing to say now. You got nothing to say now." And Wawrinka said, "What do you want me to say?" I don't really understand what the two of them are talking about. This is the transcript that I'm reading off online. I'm guessing they may have had some further interactions that we don't quite know about. But it's just good to see a bit of spice in tennis, isn't it, Alice? Like, it's one of those sports, really mano-a-mano, 1v1. Really like seeing players going at it and really caring about what they're doing. Indian Wells, obviously, we mentioned this last week, is one of the biggest tournaments in the world outside of the majors. It's, often referred to as the fifth major. Good to see some spice in the action. And just want to give a shout out to Jordan Thompson, who's a bit of a journeyman Australian tennis player. He managed to knock off Stefanos Tsitsipas in the opening round of Indian Wells. So that's an absolutely huge win for Jordan Thompson, potentially one of the biggest of his career, and good to see him getting some reward for a lot of hard work.
There we go. Well, Eddie, as much as you'd expect me to agree with you, I'm going to disagree because it's a gentleman's game, isn't it? And it was just needless. I mean, I'd understand it more if it was still during the game where you could get a bit of a mental edge and psych out your opponent, but just blabbering like this at the end of the game, I mean, leave it for social media these days, Eddie, right?
I'm going to make a very broad generalisation here, Alice, but I don't think tennis players in general are the best losers. Don't tend to take failure as well as players in some other sports. So I'm not surprised that this sort of stuff does tend to sort of happen at the net when they're shaking hands after the game, because the emotions are really raw. They're running really hot. They're probably upset about something that's happened during the game. I love it. Anything that increases the drama in any sport, I'm pretty much in favour of. So, nothing wrong with this for me.
Good stuff. Well, let's discuss this big story breaking out of the AFL today, Eddie. A class action being launched, up to 60 former players in line to take two proceedings against the AFL through this study that's been done. Now, I actually got tipped off about this a number of months ago, even about a year ago or so, Eddie. And at the time, it was said to me that when this eventually came out, it would be big, and I presume it is pretty big. Tell us what the ramifications could be.
Yeah, this is one of those trends that is it sort of seems to be sweeping through world sport, Ellis. We've sort of touched on it a couple of times in these chats, but the AFL is under a bit of attack from former players who are suing it in a class action for up to $60 million, basically saying that the AFL was negligent, and that certain players, including the likes of Max Brook, the former Geelong player who's the lead plaintiff in the action, he's alleging, and the players are alleging, that they suffered permanent life-altering injuries as a result of cushion-related injuries and due to the negligence of the AFL. So this is a big one to keep an eye on. This is not going to finish anytime soon. It's going to be a really, really long case. There's going to be many, many arguments. It's going to be pretty fraught for both sides, I think. But ultimately what is going to come out of this is that the AFL and all Australian sports are going to have to take concussion a lot more seriously than they currently are. The AFL has already spent $25 million on a long-term study into the effects of concussion. They're introducing the 12-day concussion protocols into all levels of football, which I think is a great thing. It's, even as you and I were sort of growing up, 10, 15 years ago, I remember, copping head knocks on the field playing footy. And yeah, I don't think anyone sort of took it as seriously back then as they do now. So I think it's a fantastic thing. It's one of those things that we just don't have enough knowledge about at this point. We don't really know what the effects of concussion are. We know that they're bad. We don't know how bad. And so I think, ultimately this is going to be a really positive thing for the sport, that we're going to have some clarity on, if you're a parent and your child wants to play AFL football or just football, you're going to sort of have the knowledge around what that actually means in terms of how their long-term health could potentially be affected by these sort of things. So ultimately this is going to be a good thing. It's going to result in good outcomes. It's just going to be a bit of a painful process, I think, as we start to see a little bit more of the stories behind some of these players who've really suffered as a result of these concussions.
Hardly the kind of story that AFL House wants coming out this week, Eddie, the week of the competition starting up again for 2023. Before we get to talking about matters on the field, let's talk about your Essendon Bombers. One man that's coming under some fire is Jake Stringer. So tell us what the details are behind Jake Stringer, Eddie.
Look, Ellis, I think if you've taken a look at Jake Stringer during the pre-season, it hasn't been he hasn't looked like the fittest character, let's put it that way. He's probably a bit renowned at this point for coming back to pre-seasons a little bit out of shape. I think he's a man who enjoys life outside of footy, if I can put it that way. I think basically what's happened is he's come back a little bit underdone. He's done a hammy as a result. He's been trying to make it back for this round one game for us. He's not going to get there. We've ruled him out already. That was quite a funny. I did quite like that all the Essendon social media posts during this week just put out basically a 5-word statement saying Jake Stringer is unavailable for selection this week, which predictably set off quite a few of the diehard fans who weren't too happy about Stringer's performance. This is the kind of thing, Ellis, that you bring in a new coach to fix. This is hopefully the sort of stuff that Brad Scott's going to address over the coming months and years. So, look, I've said this before, but I'm very hopeful that this is the last time that we see players rocking up for pre-season out of shape.
Well, I mean, it doesn't get any better than decorating a wall in Melbourne with a mural of Jake Stringer with the word tradie. That's a little bit insulting, isn't it? But there we go. Not the most ideal news for Bombers fans going into round one. Speaking of, Eddie, let's discuss the opening round of the AFL and plenty of games for us to feast on, of course. Now, your Essendon Bombers away to Hawthorn. Can this result in a positive result for Essendon in your view?
I certainly hope so, Ellis. This is one of those games that if we don't win this one, I think it's pretty much just pack her up for the season. I don't want to overreact too much to round one games, but if we can't beat Hawthorn, it's going to be a really long year for the Bombers. This is a fantastic round one schedule, let me say. I was having a look through this last night. We've got blockbusters left, right and centre. Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs on Saturday night is going to be an absolute cracker. We've got Geelong, Collingwood, Port Adelaide, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sydney is interesting, Richmond, Carlton. I mean, there's just fantastic games coming out of our ears. And then there's West Coast, North Melbourne as well.
Yep, at the fabulously glamorous kickoff time of 1:15 South Australian time on a Saturday. Can I get some tips off you, Eddie? Richmond, Carlton.
Look, Ellis, I'm actually tipping Richmond as a grand finalist this season. I'm extremely bullish on their prospects. I'm going to take them. A couple of the other interesting games that I really like the look of. I think Port Adelaide Brisbane's going to be fantastic. I am tipping Port there, not by much. GWS and Adelaide, I don't really know what to make of that game at all. St Kilda Freo, I think the Saints are going to be really terrible this season. I think they are potential wooden spoon candidates. So I like Freo there. There's a number of. I really can't wait to sit down and try and watch all 9 games of footy this weekend.
Well, good luck to you, Eddie Dads. I suppose you're going to need to if you're going to keep up with all the great content that scplaybook.com.au is putting out right now. Speaking of, tell us about some of the articles going up on scplaybook.com.au right now.
I mean, Ellis, this is the most exciting time of the year if you're a Supercoach fan. It's the final week before the AFL season starts, obviously. It's the last time that you're going to have to get your team in order. Your Supercoach team. We've got team reveals over on the website. So if you're interested in seeing what team I'm rolling with into round one, you can see that over on the website. I came 323rd overall last year out of about 150,000 people. So just not to toot my own horn, but I think that's a pretty good result. So if you do want to see what team I've got, I've just dropped that over on the website today. We're recording our round one podcast tonight, so that'll be dropping on all your podcast feeds, SC Playbook AFL. And obviously, if you're into NRL as well, we've got an absolute stack of content for the NRL too. Heaps of stuff up on the site. Check it out, scplaybook.com.au.
The man certainly knows what he's talking about. Eddie Dads from scplaybook.com.au. Thank you for joining us once again. We'll do it all again in a week.
Absolute pleasure, Alice. Speak to you.